Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everybody, depending on where in the world you are logging on from. It's always so nice to have our global community be able to gather. I think everybody knows me, but I'm Luke Taylor-Ide, the Vice President of Community Engagement at the university, and I was also lucky enough to serve as one of the co-faculty members for the Appalachian residential that we just completed. So I'd like to officially welcome everybody to today's presentation, where we will be looking back on an amazing learning journey that many of us were lucky enough to participate on. I will be joined in today's presentation by my co-faculty member, Jenny Totten, who is served as co-faculty and also serves as the strategy and impact officer for the Appalachian program here at Future Generations. I'd also like to take this time to introduce two special guest presenters that we have with us. We have two of the students who participated on the residential have kindly offered to come and join and share some of their personal stories and reflections. So I'd like to give each of them a minute to introduce themselves and also introduce their community. They got a lot of practice doing this as we met so many people on the residential. So Matt, why don't we start with you and just say hello to everyone, who you are, where you're from, and what your community is, and then we'll go to Forrest.
Right on, next. My name is Matt. Can you all see me also? I've never been on this side of the panel, so.
Yeah, we can all see you.
Right on. I can't see myself. My name is Matt Gleason. I'm in Colorado. I was born and raised here. I'm currently working for the I Have a Dream Foundation of Boulder County. It's also a national nonprofit. And I crossed paths with this organization through AmeriCorps. I had done 3 years of AmeriCorps, and that got me to transition into a staff position. And throughout my 5 years with the organization, I've worked with the same group of youth. I started with them when they're in 5th grade, and they're now entering their 11th grade of high school. And we offer kind of a whole child approach through their academic journey with the focus of social and emotional well-being. And if that can be addressed and they can be healthy and happy for themselves, that their academics will follow suit. In hopes to set them up for success, whatever that means to them upon high school graduation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt, and welcome. And Forrest.
Hi, I'm Forrest. I'm from Boone County, West Virginia. I'm running a small economic development organization down here. We're also a nonprofit. Right now, we're trying to build, essential first step food infrastructure here for local foods.
Thank you so much for joining us, Forrest. And as we'll get to hear about, Forrest was one of our native Appalachians throughout the residential. So we were grateful to always have his perspective. And he, like Jenny and I, got the fun experience of welcoming a lot of visitors into our home and really being able to be part of this whole process of telling a different story. So just to kick us off, the title of the residential was Appalachia, telling a different story. And we really wanted that to shine through. We wanted to pick up the amazing things that are happening in Appalachia. We wanted to pick up the amazing people in Appalachia and really talk about how, when these people come together, great things are happening. Appalachia as an area is kind of known. Unfortunately, it's best known for bad things happening here. It's got a story of extraction. It's a story of people who are backwards and don't work together, that don't like one another. And so Jenny and I, who are both from Appalachia and have significant experience working in communities that don't fit this mold or stereotype at all, really set out with our intention behind this residential was to break that narrative and tell a very different story. We wanted to talk about the success and talk about how local people are transforming their communities. So this is our core support team. We were really lucky in putting together this residential that the Future Generation Sustainable Development Learning Community is also present there. And so we were able to work and bring the academic division together with our community engagement division and really put forward a great residential. And so once again, I do want to express a big thank you to some of the Appalachian staff who were able to support both on the back end and able to join us throughout different periods of the residential to visit. So with that, we will go into our official trip. And so Jenny, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, hang on. Yep. All right, we are now full screen. All right, so we all landed in Pendleton County in time for commencement. And while we were here, we stayed at Audit Experience Learning in the yurts. So everybody, we kind of started with this like camping atmosphere, and we stayed in like a bunch of different places over the course of the trip. So I'll highlight those as we go. So we did commencement. We also talked with Jennifer Ide about school-based health systems. We also did a photography workshop. Basically, Pendleton County was where everybody landed, and we started to ground ourselves in the work we were about to do. So I'll turn it over to Luke to talk a little bit about kind of the process and everything that happened.
Yeah, so obviously, given that Pendleton County is our home, we thought it was really important. Some of the big learning objectives while we were in Pendleton County, we as folks will find out in West Virginia, we break everything down by county. And so in this presentation is also broken down by county. So Pendleton gave the students a real opportunity to get to know one another, celebrate one another's success. We had several students in the residential who were also commencing, and they got to meet some of their other classmates who commenced but did not join the residential. Gave them a chance to get some time at their head campus and meet some of their faculty face to face. And then also starting to look at the broader view of some of the challenges that Appalachia and West Virginia faces. And so we started to really kind of cast the narrative. We had the fun opportunity of watching October Sky, which is just a great movie, but also really starts to, and we really said, look, this is a negative narrative of West Virginia. We want to challenge this as we went throughout. But it was also really, I think, important for the students to get to see some examples of and have that interaction with faculty and with one another at commencement. And it served as a great basis for then going on throughout the residential.
All right, Matt or Forrest, do you have anything to add? Like a couple sentences if you do.
I wasn't sure I was ever going to make it to campus. And I sure did appreciate getting to see campus and faculty members that I also never thought I'd see in person. They just kept popping up left and right. And it was super nice to see them in person.
Honestly, it was just nice to see the different scenery. The thing about our mountains is we down in the south, our mountains are kind of real close together. So like when you go on top of a mountain, it's either the valley is filled in with rocks and dirt, or you just got a narrow little valley down by the river somewhere that you can see.
Thanks, Forrest. I wholeheartedly agree, coming from the southern part of the state. So once we left basically home turf, so we left Pendleton County and we started on our journey. The first stop was basically one county southwest of us. So we're still in the Potomac Highlands. We went down to Pocahontas County. We spent a couple of days here. So we visited a maple producer. We visited Frostmore Farm, and then one of our research faculty actually met us there to talk about maple. We saw some really good examples of evidence and collecting evidence to make decisions through the maple industry. We then went to Linwood communities, kind of the Linwood community at the base of Snowshoe Mountain, where we learned about their efforts to both start with local food, but also break into the outdoor rec community, and kind of just build community and economic development, not up on with the ski resort. We also visited the U Mountain Center, which is a large agroforestry training facility in the region. We got to see Gesundheit, which if you've ever seen the movie Patch Adams, that's totally where he's kind of based and where that hospital will be based. Lots of unique architecture there. We also took a trip down into Lewisburg for dinner one evening, and to kind of explore a very concrete, small Appalachia town that has had a lot of community and economic development work done with it. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Luke.
Yeah, so we kind of like to say that the residential followed kind of three phases or three themes. And so what we began to look at in Pendleton and really got into when we got to Pocahontas was looking at some of the successes of the initiatives that are really more based in the eastern region of the state. Pendleton County is not, West Virginia is not uniformed at all. So Pendleton, Pocahontas, and Randolph County are very distinct in the fact that they're huge. They're really, really big, but they also have some of the smallest populations of any of the counties in the state, and which gives them a unique set of challenges and opportunities. And the big one is that there's a lot of outdoor. There's the Monongahela National Forest. There is, as Forrest said, they are tall mountains, but wide mountains. And so when you look at what sustainable development looks like in this region, you start to see a lot with outdoor recreation, outdoor economies, you could almost think about. And so the intersection of foods, of forests, the picture there in the middle is up at Snowshoe, which is a local ski resort. And really looking at the way that these outdoor recreation and tourism economies are really driving a lot of the sustainable examples in the region. Now, what we'll see is this wasn't the case in other parts of the state, but this gave an opportunity from one standpoint. I was really excited about this portion because it gave a chance to really showcase the work that the Future Generations Appalachian program does. We got to see a number of our partners, of our research farms, and really look at this work around nature-based enterprise development, but also show a real snapshot, because what we wanted to show is that Appalachia is not has a lot of variation in it, and so what it needs is many different solutions to have maximum impact. And so I thought that Pocahontas was a great way to show folks really at the highest level what both the work of the Appalachian program is, but then we started to move from Pocahontas into areas that started to have slightly higher populations. So Forrest and Matt, what stood out to the two of you about your time in Pocahontas, where we were? It's very different than some of the other portions of the residential.
I think one thing for me that I captured pretty much right away was kind of I think Frostmore Farms and the U Mountain Center did a good job of displaying this, but the ability to work among differences in a productive way. I think Frostmore Farms and kind of just the whole maple scene in West Virginia in tackling both, I think, the climate and taking care of the forests and trees and whatnot, while also producing and creating a sustainable way of living in income, really, for people that don't have great means to sustainable income.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And Forrest, you mentioned the wide valleys and tall mountains. How did it contrast with the West Virginia of your childhood and your home?
Honestly, what I really took away with that area was the vast differences in the kind of development going on. Like when we went to Snowshoe and seen, it's like a high dollar, massive amount of money going into that place, and then down at the bottom of the hill, you've got it's Linwood that's at the bottom of the hill, right?
Yeah.
They are grassroots. They basically started with a community meeting, just trying to decide what they needed in the community. And those two things are so close together, but they're oceans apart from each other.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And thanks for highlighting that. So now we come to our next stage, which was a highlight for me. But Jenny, why don't you introduce this area, because this was an area I'd heard about but never gotten to visit until this trip.
Sure. So we spent a lot of time south of Charleston. So you'll notice that I have named things differently based on when we were there. So we went down to southern West Virginia. So this is basically, we took the route down to Princeton, which is right on the border with Virginia. And so here was a community where one leader had left and then come back. And then she started to gather basically her friends and her family to reinvent Princeton as an artist community and as an arts community. So we saw lots of great examples of both community building through the arts, but also economic development through the arts. And then the other thing that we did on this particular day is on our way back, we were treated to the bridge walks. We got to actually walk under the New River Gorge Bridge. So that's the first picture. And then everything else is from Princeton. This was a really fun, really exciting day. It was pretty cool. So I'll have Luke kind of discuss that a little further.
Yes, unfortunately, I had to miss out on the bridge walk event due to some administrative duties, but I will say Princeton for me was just an absolute delight and a surprise. I'd heard about it, and I remember hearing about when that work first got going, and what I remember hearing about from Lori, who maybe a decade ago was just about trying to get all the heroin needles cleaned up off of the street so it was safe for kids to be able to walk down it to come to these art classes, and that every morning there's new heroin needles there. So I didn't know what to expect when we got there, but I didn't expect what we saw, which really was the way to see a community that had hit very much rock bottom and said, so even people who maybe would have originally been more closed-minded or not open to new ideas said, well, it doesn't matter what we do as long as we do something. And there are these young people who are pushing the arts. And that is really the story of what we saw, is the way that really using art and theater and performance, not just visual art, but all the different arts, to both initially engage youth and also start to bring the community together. And so, as you can see, they've done a lot with beautification in their historic downtown, which had become basically deserted. And they continue now to be able to kind of use this and drive this. They're now seeing, coffee shops and all. It's a pleasant space to be. They have visitors now who are specifically coming to take a place in the art classes and the art events that they happen. That this particular community hosts 8 different festivals or cultural events a year, basically, at least not quite every month, but pretty close to it, that they market to outsiders to come in and come visit that area. And so what you're seeing now is a real critical mass of the community coming together. And it's just really, really exciting. I was actually out a few weeks ago and ran into a group of the artists from the Princeton community who were out and about. And it was really fun to make that connection with them even still. So, and I think one thing that Princeton's done is not just impact this town, but they also have been spearheading this initiative called Create Your State. So trying to get other communities throughout the state to visit Princeton, learn what they've been able to do with art, and replicate it. And so, for instance, for those of us who are from the area, the community of Thomas, which is doing a lot with art revitalization, is mirroring what Princeton's done, and they're in dialogue and community. And so it's really fun to see both that impact and just be wowed by that impact in the community, where everybody, has nothing but good things to say about the new things coming in. But then also to have been traveling throughout the state and see the way that this community has already begun to impact others throughout the state and the region. Forrest, why don't we start with you in terms of your reflections, and then we'll go to Matt, because you, like myself, were probably a little as shocked as I was when we pulled into that community.
Actually, I'm gonna pull a shock on you here. That's actually not the case. Lori has actually been up a couple times to my area to talk about the Create Your State stuff. When Dig In, before we became a nonprofit, we were just a group of community members, and we had a grant through the hub, and she came up as part of that to kind of give us an outline of things. But as far as the area goes, it was just wonderful for me to see a place that was alive. I mean, my downtown area down here is sober homes, MAT programs, dollar store, and then basically a bunch of like clothing boutiques that are owned by, I want to say, rich people that are hemorrhaging money, and they're still in business because they can throw money at it because it's fun. So it was nice to see life in something that previously had none.
Luke, maybe I'll help you out. I was surprised to see what I saw.
There you go.
Yeah. I thought Princeton was super cool. And I think in reflecting, and I'm still reflecting on the trip, one thing that really stuck out to me with Princeton was I don't think a lot of things happen on their own, especially in the world of like creating positive change. That certainly doesn't happen on its own, and someone's behind the wheel, driving the car and making that happen. And it takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes a desire to want to create that change. And I think Lori really captured that. And even among the challenges and the hard work, it's clear that she's made it fun, which was maybe one of the most special things about it. And she just carried that through her spirit, through the art that she shared with us. I think it also rubs off on the community with the people that we got to interact with. Just a super cool place.
All right, animations and Prezi, not always cooperating. All right, so after we left Princeton and went towards Charleston, we spent the night at the retreat facility there. And then the next day we got up and we headed in the other direction towards the Southern coalfields. So we went down to where, basically towards Kentucky, if you will. So we stopped and we saw Forest Project, actually. So we got to visit with Dig In. He had a number of volunteers that were there. He had a number of family members that were there. And we got to see this entire community that he's building around gardening and around gardening education, which will then in a few years probably translate into some serious economic development for this little tiny community in Boone County. Once we left there, we headed further towards Kentucky into Mingo County, where we visited with another student, Grace Williams. She couldn't be on the trip because she was busy with summer camp with a ton of children up on the mountain, but we got to see Big Laurel. We helped out with a service project. We painted some active learning sidewalks in 95-degree heat, which was an adventure for sure. But I think everybody had a good time. And then we went on up to Big Laurel and met with her and one of the vistas there, around kind of the history and the future of Big Laurel, which started as a community center for this community. And now as people are moving off of the mountain, they're trying to figure out what their next chapter looks like. And then we finished with an adventure at a Thai restaurant in South Charleston, where actually our students got to meet with partner faculty. So we have Dr. Barbara Liedl, who is from West Virginia State University. So she talked with some of the American students about kind of federal grant processes, because that's her expertise. And then a maple producer who is also a missionary who has kind of spent a lot of time in Haiti joined us. So Paul Ronk was there. And then I forget. Oh yeah. Dr. Lidl brought her PhD students from Nepal. So Surendra got to enjoy some folks from his home country and kind of talk with them about what they're doing in the US. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Luke.
Yeah, so I don't have a ton to say about this day other than it was a lot of fun, and it was kind of, I guess the whole theme behind the day was for we tried not to do much teaching throughout and let the sites speak for themselves, but day was all about peer networking. So, you know, I can't thank Forrest enough for welcoming us into his home and showcasing that work. It's never easy to, you know, suddenly you know, you've got this work, you've been talking about this work, but then to showcase it and have your other peers come in and look at it. Likewise, you know, for Grace to open up and make the time for us to come. But I think that, you know, even for some of the students, seeing that work was, I think, highly beneficial from both standpoints, because we always say that, you know, the only people who can really understand what our students are going through with the labs or with their coursework when we're doing the online learning are the other students. And so this was basically the entire day was like one big breakout group in terms of everybody having the chance to really ask questions, problem solve. They know one another. I think for me, it was really fun to see the way, if you go visit a formal group, sometimes you see the students would be a little shy. Not on this day. They just jumped right in. I turned around briefly and just saw, you know, Forrest was off with the students and Jenny and I were just standing there, and we just said, okay, let's sort of watch the students really get it and talk. And likewise, even that evening, we had some guests, some friends joining us, but we broke ourselves up. We took a problem like that they couldn't seat us all at one table, and we said, great. So we broke people up into assigned seating. And I think that actually some really interesting discussion, I think, probably came out of that evening around people learning from the kind of technical expertise they've been paired with. So Forrest and Matt, we'd love to hear from you all about that day. I thought it was very, very powerful, but also the primary point of it being that it really was one for you all to control the conversation.
I'll go ahead and go first if you want, Matt.
You got it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo everything you said, Luke. I mean, it was I was happy to have other people come see what I was doing. It was good to be able to see, especially down in Mingo County, what was going on down there between the little stop we made to help out at the school, and then on to the center there to check out how they kind of came about between their history and how they maintained their setup. And then even a little education on the road back. I learned about the aquaponics place that they've got down there that's running. That was another great lesson there. And dinner with Barbara was very, very entertaining and very, very helpful for my thought process on trying to look on the longer term of things as far as applying for federal money and that kind of thing. Her tomato love stories were interesting.
I agree with a lot that has been said. Definitely an enjoyable day. I think Dig In and the work that Forrest is doing was maybe a highlight for myself on the trip, especially after getting back and thinking about it. The work that he's doing just kept trickling in to my thoughts throughout the trip. And maybe because Forrest was on the trip with me, I could always just kind of go to him and ask a question or hear his thoughts on what his future looked like with Dig In. And so that could have played a role, but it was also, I think, going off of what I just said for Princeton, Forrest, I think, shares a lot of that same spirit and cares a lot, and you can see it in his work. But the stage in which his work and Dig In is at a completely different stage of where Princeton's at. So I appreciated getting to see those different perspectives, and just super cool to see a small community come together in what sounds like a community that is really resistant to change, and having some passion and desire to change that drive the work. It was super cool to see. And the future just looks huge for Forrest. So I'm excited to see what becomes of what he's doing.
All right, that day I think was my favorite day too. I wholeheartedly agree. The next day we woke up and had an adventure in Charleston. So we started our day on the west side, which is a historically Black community. Very, very, in the past few years, it has become less rundown, but high poverty, etc. Looks the most like an urban area that we found on our trip. So a lot of the same inner city problems that inner city Pittsburgh has, that Chicago has, etc. So we met with one leader, Darrell Miller, and his crew. They are working to basically build up the community in whatever way people are excited about most. And so what started as a literacy program then became like a family care program, then became a garden program, and now is turning into a grocery store and like a resource facility. So I think the students really saw what 10 to 15 years of work looks like when you listen deeply to what's needed in your community. Things shift a little, but the goal is the same. Then we met with a former Future Generation student and one of the very first alums, so Reverend Patterson, and talked about his work in scaling up with drug treatment and drug prevention all over West Virginia. So what he started on the west side is now being scaled to many facilities across the state, which is really cool. Then we headed to Montgomery and Smithers, where we met the first two of several very interesting mayors along our way. So these two mayors are both working together and sharing resources, and playing off of one another to make sure that their two small communities are moving forward and are recognized as gateway communities for the New River Gorge and the National Park, as well as still players in the larger Charleston area. And this was also the second or third time the power went out on us on this trip. So you see a picture of us meeting in the dark. I think something that was really cool was we all just kept going, right? So we lost power and the discussion just kept. It was like it never happened, which was really cool. The students were still very engaged. The mayors were still very engaged. And in the middle of this like almost crisis, the two mayors were like, okay, you guys are more important and we want to make sure we're sharing our story and hearing from you all. Our teams have it. So we actually got to see sort of in real time what it looks like when a team has it and the leaders can still do what they were supposed to do. And then that evening was just a really fun night in Charleston. We grabbed dinner. A few of us went to Live on the Levee. And then a few actually went back to the retreat center. And by this point, we're about halfway through the trip. So they were like doing laundry and or tired was a thing. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Luke for the rest of the story.
Yeah, I think we were exhausted after the trip. And I think times I joked about how tired we would have been if every day had been like the Charleston day, because we packed in so much into one day that you easily could have spent a whole day with any one of those sites and we still would have skimmed the surface. But the work on the west side is really amazing work. As Jenny said, it's great representation of what happens when you listen to your community and you're able to really bring people together in terms of just saying, let's make this space better, especially the people from within. It's also really unique work because, as Jenny also mentioned, there aren't a lot of communities in West Virginia like the west side of Charleston. It's a rural state. And so there are just some of these issues that come in a more urban space, and especially an urban minority space, the way the west side, it's a problem that's very common throughout most of America. But it's not one that's as common in West Virginia. And so it was really great to see what that community's been doing in the morning. And then obviously to go and see a longtime friend and colleague of mine, Reverend James Patterson, who, as Jenny mentioned, was in the very first master's program. And one thing that I always like about visiting Reverend Patterson is he really talks seed scale. He believes in seed scale. His staff will tell you about seed scale. You ask them what their secret is, and they'll start talking to you about seed scale. And to see over the way that, like Durrell had done, is doing now on the West Side, Reverend Patterson's work around primary health care, and especially around drug addiction, that began out of his congregations is now being able to scale up. The stuff with Montgomery and Smithers is really fantastic, because that is definitely geographically, those communities are right next to each other. There just so happens to be a bridge and a river in between them. So but up until recently, because of that, they have been rivals. And, so the previous mayors to this, we heard some pretty hilarious stories about how, the one mayor would drive through the other's town and they'd have them arrested, because, this all sounds very familiar to those of us who are from Appalachia. You hear about these rivalries between towns, and the way that these two have really come together and said, we're stronger together. We're two little communities just outside of Charleston. No one's ever going to pay attention to us if we don't come together and work together. And they're very different personalities, talk about opposite ends of the political spectrum even. And to hear them in a time where everything's so divisive, to hear them talk about the necessity of working together, I think was really uplifting for everyone. And as Jenny mentioned, they didn't just meet with us in the dark. They met with us for over 3 hours in the dark, while there was a power outage in knocking their, so that the stoplight for the bridge connecting their two towns was out. And they had both their police forces out dealing with this emergency. And aside from getting up very briefly once and taking a phone call, they pretty much ignored the local situation, because they decided that talking with future generation students about how to have effective community change action was maybe not more important, but definitely more fun than dealing with the bridge crisis. So it was just a lot of fun. And I think, and as Jenny said, that the fact that when the power went out, there was not even a single inclination that we were going to stop talking, because everybody was really, and I even thought about it and looked around, and the students were just, there was no stopping the force of that conversation. Matt, Forrest, what did you all think of Smithers and Montgomery? And well, Charleston. I know that Charleston was highly impactful for a lot of us as well.
Forrest, you want to go?
I guess so. I'll go. Honestly, that whole area was great. It was good to see things that I have driven by and never really noticed before. It was nice to see the great stuff on the west side of Charleston going on. But above everything, the Smithers and Montgomery thing kind of gave me a little bit of hope. I kind of live in a same situation. Madison and Danville are two towns right here that basically you don't know where one ends and the other begins. It's kind of a running joke that we call it Madville, because it's things are a little crazy and you never know what's going on. But it was nice to see that if those two communities, after all the bad blood and the fighting and bickering, could come together and really put some effort in, that maybe there's some hope here that we could get a little more going on between those two entities that I deal with regularly.
I need to be careful with saying what part was my favorite part of the trip, because and maybe I won't say it anymore after this, because I think Charleston was the highlight for me. I think for a couple different reasons. I think it really captured seed scale. Going into this trip, I had heard about seed scale. Obviously, I've done reading about it. I've been talked to and talked with about it. And I think comparing this and what's happening in Charleston to like the case studies that I've read in books, it was just so nice to see in person. I think Keep Your Faith was a great example of seed. I was talking to Luke about this, and Patterson's work was a great example of scale, and just getting to see like what actually goes into the process was super unique, but they also did a great job of explaining it and showing what went into it and the effort and the work. And I don't think I need to say a whole lot more about Montgomery and Smithers.
Thanks, Matt. All right. So as if the Charleston day wasn't long enough, we then the next morning packed up and headed towards my neck of the woods in McDowell County, where we were treated to quite the adventure in Welch. So we started up at Mount View High School, where the students got to showcase their high tunnel project. And a teacher was actually there too. So they got to talk about some of the difficulties of dealing with the school system in a very rural part of Appalachia that has a hard time with teachers and has a hard time with kind of meeting even basic needs. So what it looks like for a community to meet the basic needs of its students. We also up there, the members of the Appalachian Beekeeping Collective were there as well. So we have a couple of chapters in McDowell. And so they came to talk about kind of building, similarly to what the Appalachia team has done with maple, there's an organization that's working to do that around honey in West Virginia. And so they were both showcasing their products, but also talking about the process and what it means to sort of basically build a cooperative in a state that's not too kind to cooperatives. We also visited the Welch News, which is a small community newspaper that found itself struggling with how to get into the 21st century about 5 years ago. And as of 4 years ago, is now owned by a community member in Welch instead of an outside conglomerate, which is really cool. So they got to talk a little bit about local ownership and what it means to tell your local story. They also gave us a walking tour of Welch, where I think we met most of McDowell County along that walking tour, it felt like. And then that evening, we stayed in a bed and breakfast that is actually a converted bachelor's housing for coal miners. So a local bought it, turned it into an Airbnb for ATV riders, and then we were fortunate enough to get to stay. So I will stop there and let Luke talk a little.
Well, I'll try to keep it brief, and just say that I think from a learning or thematic standpoint, it really was a continuation of the things we've been seeing all along, but the context was very different. So at this point, we now had entered formal coal country, and of course we'd been down there before when we were visiting forest work and everything. But to be in a historic coal town and to stay in a historic coal lodge or dormitory space there, where there's very clearly history all around you, and it's a very different than anybody who's been to Southern West Virginia knows that coal saturates everything. It's part of the culture. It's part of the experience when you're there. So I think to be able to see some of these same activities, but from a very different, if we were kind of challenging the narrative on what is traditional Appalachia beforehand of saying, yeah, well, it's not all coal country. In this case, we were saying, yeah, well, everything in coal country isn't necessarily bad. And I think specifically looking at the obviously all the work we saw, but stories like the Welch News coming together and saying, no, we are going to continue to have a paper and we're going to take ownership of it, was just a really powerful example of that. Forrest, Matt, love to hear you all's reflections on our time in McDowell.
I really enjoyed the time in McDowell. The time we got to the tour in Welch was really eye-opening, between the beautiful riverside space that they've created down there after the flooding disasters that have caused them such trouble down there. The old buildings and their new uses or even plans for new uses was interesting, because we have a lot of that here where I'm at. Old buildings that need to find new use and maybe some new owners. But honestly, the school agriculture program kind of knocked it out of the park for me. That was right along with what I'm doing, and I really loved the example and the model that they that they put together. I felt like it checked all the boxes and more for me, for what I would like to do here. So I might be picking Jenny's brain a little bit shortly about trying to make that a reality where I'm at.
My exposure to cold country before this trip was October Sky, and I think that was more so through a perspective of rockets than coal. So I'm glad we rewatched it at the beginning of this trip, and I think McDowell and just cold country in general, I think I was able to walk away from it with much more empathy and compassion and understanding that coal isn't everything about coal isn't bad, and at one point it was supporting lives and families and the economy, and now it's just kind of looked down on and only has a negative connotation. And I think the sites that we got to see here did a good example of wanting to change that narrative and putting their whole hearts into that process. And what felt super special was getting like them volunteering their time to share their story, especially with Welch News. And I've never seen a newspaper printing factory like that before, so that was cool. I think, yeah, just a super cool place, and learned a lot internally of how to see differences in new light.
All right, so we left McDowell, and I sort of put 3 days into one set of pictures and slides here. So we went into kind of far Southwest Virginia and far Eastern Kentucky, kind of in one big region. So we went to Apple Shop on one day, where we learned about kind of what it means to regionally tell a story from within. So Apple Shop is a media company that focuses on Appalachian stories and kind of telling the future of Appalachia through story. We, the next day, went over to Hazard, Kentucky. Val, one of our students, got interviewed by the Hazard News, which was pretty cool. But we got to see kind of another example of downtown revitalization through both building redevelopment and the arts, and also learned about a youth development program that matches students with government. So the city of Hazard, Kentucky runs a leadership program. We also met with another very, very quirky mayor who was pretty exciting. And then after that, the next day we spent in Abington, Virginia. So we got to go visit Anthony Flacovino's farm. So we got the farm tour. We also were treated to a discussion about rural-urban divide and sort of what it means to come together around differences, lots of differences, political, socioeconomic, et cetera. I think the highlight for the entire trip for Luke and I, for those of you that were on when Kate and I were talking about the Maple Project and the SDLC, we found our syrup on store shelves out of the state. So we probably scared all of this food country store to death when we squealed, but we were very excited. So that's also here. So the students actually sort of got to see the final, like the end result of a lot of work around community organizing around maple syrup, which was really cool. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Luke.
Well, yeah, I'll start with the excitement of finding authentic Appalachia on store shelves, which was not on the itinerary. We were driving, and I said, Jenny, did you see what we just passed? We gotta turn around. She said, don't worry, there's another one 5 miles. So we pulled into the next one because we had started. If you all think back to when we were in Pocahontas County or when they were in Pendleton County, they visited several maple operations. These are the partner researchers and producers who make that syrup. So to be on the very farms where the syrup's made, and then 10 days later, after seeing many things, finally kind of and hear us talk about it and talk about the way that we've been trying to use maple syrup as a sustainable enterprise, to then see it, in another state on store shelves and kind of see that. So this whole journey of from a learning standpoint. And that also really kind of is what we wanted to showcase during our brief stint in Kentucky and Southwestern Virginia. Was in many ways, these are areas that are a little further along in the development process, or in the case of ones where they're not, they're in another state. And so most of the examples we'd been looking at of Appalachia were in the context of West Virginia. So I thought it was really interesting when we got to Kentucky to see almost identical work, but even little things down to like what they call their county commissioners is different in Kentucky. And so learning to kind of adapt to that, as you're in conversation. And certainly Apple Shop's work around storytelling and this narrative, which kind of had served as part of the inspiration for Jenny and I for how we framed it. And so I thought it was, and you also have some groups down in that region that are working at a slightly larger scale. They've just been doing this work for longer. And so it really kind of was able to give a sense of slightly larger scale of this sort of work happening in Appalachia, and also starting to kind of get us out. And I thought that I was really grateful to Anthony Flacovento, who's a faculty member here, for making the time not only to show us his beautiful farm, one of the most idyllic little organic farms I've ever been on, but also for this final conversation around the urban to rural divide, because that a lot of it, when we thought about, telling a different story, the story told about Appalachia elsewhere, you could largely say is the urban narrative of who we are. And so it was really exciting for us to be able to tell the internal one. Forrest and Matt.
Like the rest of the trip, I greatly enjoyed our time down there. It felt like I got something different everywhere we went. Hazard was like, I just can't put it into words with Hazard. It's like, to me, it's what my community should be, but we're not willing to put the work in yet for that. So it was kind of like, if they can do that there, maybe someday in my lifetime we might get to that point. And I love the mentorship program over in Southwest Virginia with United Way. They were they had the right idea. Cultivate the next generation, and then your problems will begin to eliminate themselves as stable, equipped people that understand leadership begin to multiply. The organic farm was definitely a big boost with everything, especially with my agriculture work. Seeing the things that I have been thinking about incorporating being brought to life with like no real like it wasn't anything special, even though when I try to talk to people here about those things, they kind of look at me like I'm from Mars. So it was good to get some validation with some of the ideas that are already being put into practice in other places.
Awesome. And Matt, reflections on the final day, or final several days, Kentucky, Southwest Virginia.
Just a super nice way to wrap up the trip. I think, as you both mentioned, seeing projects that are maybe further along in their development. I think Anthony's discussion really captured just kind of where we're at as a country, and in like small, tangible action items that we can start to work towards to change that narrative. All these sites provided some nice closure. I think the Apple Shop storytelling and getting to connect on a different level with the people we had been staying with the last 12 days was super nice. So I think very well done to get all these at the end to bring that closure.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We don't have a ton of time, but we do have a little bit of time. If there are folks either here in the room or joining online that have questions, Jenny and I will answer questions, but you're going to get better answers if you ask Forrest or Matt, I'm sure.
Well, let me just say a big thank you to the Appalachian team and the faculty for putting together this wonderful program. I just want to thank you all. And this was the first of the new residential sequence. And we're really excited. And the next residential will be in India with the Mahatma Gandhi. But we do, I guess, Lindsay, it's great. You're on, and Chris, so.
Well, I had a quick question. Was there something that, well, maybe not quick, sorry. Was there something that you immediately identified that you wanted to implement in any of your projects that you're doing?
Forrest and Matt, I think that's for you.
Yes.
Honestly, with me, the school agriculture program is like definitely, because like I'm already trying to build like an education center for like agriculture, like on a level like people can do on their own at their home or on a small scale. But like to see the program where they're bringing in money, they're putting fresh produce out to local markets, and not only that, they're educating the students, and the students are able to see how a real business works with the model of everything. That is like sweet honey to everything I'm doing. I'm gonna like I said before, I'm gonna be busting my butt to make that happen here.
Well, thank you. Matt, was there something that you saw that you immediately thought would be interesting for your project?
Yeah, I think I find myself thinking about how to implement seed scale a lot in the work that I'm doing. And I think like the goal of our organization is to create behavior change, and like just have these youth have a fulfilling and sustainable life now and in the future. And I often get myself lost in it of like, how can I put seed scale to this? And I think maybe it was on the last day I asked Luke one question and he just couldn't stop talking for a good 30 minutes and it was like all gold. And I had to pull out my notebook and started writing things down. And I think two of the things that I know I can be doing personally to accelerate and make better the work that I'm doing is the evidence. I think as an organization, we have a ton of evidence. We gather information. We know these students intimately and their families. We visit them in their homes at least twice a year. So our work goes far beyond the school setting. And for my 5 years here, we haven't done a whole lot with the information, and our decision making is just kind of going with our gut when we could be using this information. And I think I've been frustrated with the organization because we haven't been in that space to make that happen. But it's certainly something I can be doing individually and at the site that I'm at with my program director. And then the other, I think I'm more excited about this one. And it's given that the students I work with are in 11th grade, money is of great interest to them. And I've just been racking my brain on how we can support them financially and get them paid through potentially trying to get them more engaged in programming. And I think it's possible. I don't think we can outright pay them in cash as a nonprofit for someone that is a part of the organization. But I think that there are ways in which we could start to incentivize engagement and participation through a means that they're interested in, instead of trying to pull teeth to get them engaged. So I'm pretty excited about that. I don't know where it's going to land, but
Well, thank you.
All right, Lindsay, you had a question, and then we'll go to Joey.
Yeah, just real quick. First, thanks guys for always sharing the information that we put out. That's always very helpful, in our endeavors. But I was just curious, do you guys have an effective way to share information about the projects that you're working on? Like Luke and Jenny had mentioned, the goal with this was to change the narrative of what is commonly accepted about Appalachia, and the work that you guys do is so important. I was just curious if there's a way that you guys share information or communicate the work that you're doing, and if there's a way that we could help in doing so.
Go
of
ahead, Matt.
course. Okay,
Oh,
you got it. You go.
all right. I think in ways, you guys have been highlighting some of the things. I typically follow on LinkedIn and on Facebook. I've been seeing posts highlighting individuals and little tidbits of what they're doing. I think there might be some capacity to maybe additionally share I don't know, news stories or something like that. If we do like local news or anything like that, that might be another opportunity to just kind of put that out as, oh, here's one of our students doing this in this area. Here's the local story on that. Outside of that, I'm sure there are other things that I don't know what things are cost effective for what you guys have in mind.
That's a good idea, Forrest. I'll get in touch with you to get some of those stories.
I'm not 100% sure I have a clear answer for this one. I personally feel kind of we're like one chapter of a national nonprofit, and I'm like the lowest staff position available in the organization. And I don't say that in a negative way, but I think it's just kind of outside of the scope that I'm doing in my work, but it's definitely a possibility. I would just have to think about it a little bit more.
That's fair.
All right, Joey, if you want to ask your question that you put in the Q&A, that would be awesome.
All right. Y'all can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So one thing that I was thinking about when the presentation worked its way through the different sites that you all visited is that the theme of the residential was about changing narratives, changing the narrative of Appalachia. But unless I'm wrong, the only site that actually explicitly does narrative work that you visited was Appalachia. Let me know if I'm missing somebody. But most of the sites you visited were local community success stories, economic development success stories, or those sorts of things. So I wanted to know, I guess, yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm not going to interrupt myself. I'm going to finish the question. So what specifically, Matthew and Forrest, did you all have insights into the way that narrative work or that narrative change is a result of community work, or the other way around? Did you have any insight about the big picture connection between community-led economic development and the narratives about places and people?
Honestly, you're kind of right. Nobody really talked about the narrative part too much. I mean, I think we had bits of it here and there, but I think more of the concept was along the lines of actions speak louder than words kind of situation. I think all of the places are trying to do minimal multimedia as far as what they can afford to do, because I know a lot of these places are not on big budgets, either through social media or that kind of thing. I would think that there's work to be done as far as that goes, trying to present that in a way that the communities can understand it without having to be versed in the setup.
I think I might push back a little bit and say there's while the economy was a big focus, I mean, I think Welch News sticks out to me. I think they're focused on sharing their story because they didn't like what the world was hearing about them. So they're putting their effort in struggling economically, and at times finding themselves hard to justify keeping the doors open to do this work when there perhaps arguably greater needs to be focused on. But I also think one of the common themes that I kept hearing was keeping youth around, in particular educated youth. How can we keep them engaged? And I think with that narrative, I think what Jenny's doing with the farm there, while driven with money also, there's a connection to food and having a purpose and seeing something greater than just money. Yeah, I think that there was more in the narrative change if we dug more for it. I think, I'm not sure why I just lowered my hand. I'm trying to go back to your question. Yeah, I think just a lot of pride that was shown. And I think, yeah, I think I'll pause there for now.
Okay, well, I think that brings us pretty much to a close. Just one thing really quickly I would like to say, because it's true that we did see a lot of, economic development, but if you want to know what the story inside Appalachia is by the people in Appalachia, it comes down to this. How can we afford to live here? How can we that's why people leave. They need jobs. And so, while the negative narrative from outside is about Appalachia because they don't like the way, or there are bad stereotypes about how those choices have been made, it's, if you're going to reconcile the narrative that Appalachians tell about themselves with the narrative from outside, a lot of it comes down to being able to have these two stories about people being able to live on their land, take care of their families on their land, live in this place that they love. I've never met somebody who said, I'm leaving Appalachia because I hate it. I honestly have never heard that. And I have to leave because I get a job. And that, that's what the songs are about West Virginia and about the place. Those are the songs that are sung here. And I think that that's an important piece of it. Is I love what Forrest was saying, is actions speak louder than words. And so, Joey, I love your question because it's a true point. But, what we wanted to do was let people experience these successes so that they could understand them and not just hear tell of them, and kind of experience these successes, because that's the best way to really understand the power of a success, is to experience and have it touch your life. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for giving me the opportunity. We had I think Jenny and I, it was a lot of work, but we had a lot of fun, and we learned as much as if the students learned half as much as what the two of us learned over that 10 days. I'm sure it was a huge success. And thank you again, Forrest and Matt, for taking the time out of your day to join us and share some of your own reflections on the day. Okay, thanks everybody.